Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to Hail Yes, the Detroit Free Press podcast about University of Michigan athletics. I'm Tony Garcia, Michigan football and basketball writer for The Free. Joining me, as always, are the usual suspects, and that starts with our Big Ten insider, Reiner Saban. And my friend, I don't know if you want to know something, but literally 20 seconds ago, I just decided to look up what Reiner means, and it makes all too much sense now. Here we go. A masculine name of Norse origin, meaning judgment warrior. So how are you, our judgment warrior?
Doing well. That was good research on your part there. So yeah, my name is one of those things that people get tripped up on how it's spelled versus how it's pronounced. So.
Do people call you Rainer all the time?
Oh yeah, I don't.
Do you just accept it, or?
Yeah, I just accept it.
Are you going to tell the story of the beat last year? So we're a number of us are in a circle. Reiner's not there.
Perfect.
And we're not in any bad way. We're talking about Reiner, this and that. And someone says Reiner. Someone says, I thought it's Reiner. And then he walks up. There's like 8 of us who've known him for multiple years now. And then we're like, so is it Reiner? He goes, yeah, it's Reiner. Just in the casual, calm Reiner voice. No, nothing else. We're like, okay. And that's it. And since then, everybody's known. Isn't that how it happened?
Yes. Well, yeah. I remember at like some kind of school assembly, I had my name called 4 different ways, I think it was. And like people just constantly trip over it. So it's understandable given how it's spelled versus how it would be, pronounced in English. But it's a German name. So I guess, that's why it sounds the way it does.
I'll save everybody the trouble of me trying to say it with my German accent. But that other voice that you heard, of course, is our editor and producer, whose name does not have as cool of a background. It's Andrew Burkle. What type of warrior are you, Andrew? Right?
Keyboard, I guess. Not quite judgment warrior, but maybe a keyboard warrior. I think that I'd settle for that.
Okay.
But yeah, my last name trips people up too. I have the first name problem. Or Reiner has the first name problem. I have the last name problem. A lot of people go with Berkeley or so many people. Yeah, so many people go Berkeley. I mean, Berkler. There's every single mess up you could possibly think of. Like they just get it tripped up between like the R and the K.
I forgot on my last name too, though. I mean,
Sabine.
Yeah.
That's bad. If they mess up, if they call you Sabine.
Sabin. Yeah.
Rainer Sabin.
Yeah. Luckily, Nick Saban's kind of helped things.
Even though it's a different spelling, though.
It's a different spelling, although somehow, clearly I'm related to him.
I guess now I should be thankful for having a relatively basic name like Tony Garcia. The worst I've ever gotten is Garsha. I've gotten Garsha, and it's like, Garcia is really one of the most common names on earth. Like, have we not seen this one before? or like, when like someone's asking like, okay, like what's your name? And I'll be like, yeah, Tony Garcia. They'll be like, all right, can you spell that for me? And I do get it. I can't judge because Andrew, at our old job, right, at Channel 6, WNS TV6 in Lansing, shameless plug there. I mean, you have to ask people how to spell their name because it's going to go in the lower third, right? Or even for print now, but also in TV, something I would always mess up. You have to ask how to pronounce it too. When you're writing it, you just spell it. Hey, can you spell your name for me? But then someone would spell their name for me and I'd be like, ooh, like, is it Reiner or is it Rainer, right? Like you'd get one of those. And then, because you reach a limit. You can't ask, like, how many times is too many times to ask. Yeah, you just missed it. You just missed the window if you didn't get it in the first few. But all right, wow, that was deep dive. Well, there's going to be a lot of deep dives today. Hopefully, maybe not too deep, but not too shallow. We're going to try to find that happy middle ground today because yesterday was Michigan football head coach Sherrone Moore's first and I suppose only a press conference of the true fall camp. We will speak to him again in a couple of Mondays, but that's not fall camp. That is a season preview. That will be the Monday leading up to the season opener against Fresno State. So with this being the one and only time we're talking to Sherrone during the fall camp, we really, I don't know, it kind of puts a heightened weight or sense of importance on the things he says. Also, you really got to, as the reason we keep Reiner around, our judgment warrior, he will always judge and he will be that arbiter of truth versus when you need to sort of read into it a little bit, right? Which as you always do. I mean, that's really just sort of doing our job. So first half of the show, takeaways from the press conference, what was said, what does it really mean? And then in the second half, this was a great idea by Andrew and something we've wanted to get into for a few weeks, maybe a couple months now, but really feels like a really very timely occasion to do it. Sherrone Moore is taking over for Jim Harbaugh in a pretty unique circumstance, right? Coach taking over for success, high expectations, I guess you could call it. What are some similar situations? Now, there's not going to be any that is exactly parallel, but in the past 10, 15 years, we came up with a pretty decent list, I feel, of comps, and you may be surprised with how some of them fared, how some didn't. And so we'll just sort of use that as our template for what can reasonably be expected for this next Michigan era that we are very much entering. And Reiner, if you ask Sherrone Moore, don't look at any of these comps, right? I mean, it's going to be much better than that for him and the Michigan Wolverines. That was my takeaway from yesterday. Confidence is extremely high, but Reiner, maybe was your takeaway, is it too high?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that it's too high. I mean, he's carrying himself with that kind of swagger and almost like nonchalance. But he's brushed off any concern or anything. And, it seems like, the interpretation I get from, everything he said up until this point is basically, I got this. And that's kind of what it was, the big takeaway I had from the tone of the press conference yesterday.
And I think there's reasons for to see it both ways, right? Is the glass half full? Is the glass half empty? Dusty May had a fantastic line the other day very quickly when we were saying that, and I was sort of asking about this very quick aside. He was like, well, some people see it as a glass half full, some see it as glass half empty. I think that your glass is just twice as big as it needs to be, right? like you could just do it the glass half the size, then you got a full glass of milk, right? I don't know. I'd never heard anyone responded to that way before. I thought that was funny. But there's some obvious reasons why they would be confident, right? Well, I mean, they are the defending national champion, right? that counts for something. They have, Mason, KG, Will Johnson, all three of them were just named today as we sit here and record on Wednesday, August 14th, to preseason All-American teams. If you look at first round NFL projections, four guys, with Colston Loveland also being a part of that list very frequently on it. And had Rod Moore not been hurt, I think a lot of people would have thought he'd be maybe late first round kind of guy, and who knows how he returns. So that's Sherrone's point for why he's confident. He's like, hey, we still got some dudes here.
Yeah, they have dudes, but it's concentrated at, certain one side of the ball generally. They have some major question marks on offense, I guess, but particularly at the quarterback position, number one, at the offensive line, which again has been kind of the foundation of the entire program the last 3 years. And then you have the idea that, again, Sherrone Moore is not, coaching the offensive line. You have a new kind of play caller in the mix on offense. And you also have a new defensive coordinator who's bringing in his own spin on this Ravens defense and some indication that, that it's going to be a little different, maybe more man coverage, more blitzing. So there is a lot of difference between, I think, this year's team and last year's team.
So I was reading a lot of you guys. I read all Tony's stories yesterday, and Reiner, your story, and Sean's story. And one of the quotes that stuck out to me was Sherrone saying something along the lines of, as long as I'm around, we're good on the offensive line, essentially, to paraphrase. What did you guys make of that comment? Because, anyone who knows anything about football is offensive lines are kind of like a work of art. You know what I mean? It's kind of like you have to paint and touch and put these guys in the right spot. How did those comments come off to you guys in the building?
Well, for me, I think, again, it's a lot of this is going to be the way that you perceive this team, the way you perceive this program, and how much you feel you can take Sherrone Moore at face value. The reason why I'll give him the benefit of the doubt there is it is a been there, done that with the offensive line. Sure, there are absolutely new pieces, but even though there's been, the whole thing is new piece, right? Like that one starter returns, but Gio Hadi and Greg Crippen and Jeff Percy and Andrew Gentry and even Miles Hinton, these guys were all working together as the second line last year. Maybe in slightly different spots. Now you got Josh Preeb in from Northwestern. But these, Gentry is technically a junior in grade, but he graduated high school in 2020. This is a fifth year. This guy's been out of high school 5 years. Jeff Percy, he's a fifth year lineman. Gio Hadi has played in 20 games and has 3 starts under his belt. Crippen's played in 15, even Raheem Anderson, who's sort of the depth behind him at center. And so now, do I expect it to be? And let's not forget, last year's line was not the same as 2022, right? I mean, they did not generate the same push consistently in the run game, and the offense was still putting up 30-some points a game. So that's why they were a finalist last year and not the Joe Moore Award winner. And so can they be at that level, like an elite offensive line? I still think they have it. And everybody who we've spoken to have raved as much about Grant Newsome as Sherrone Moore. So now certainly will there be some, I mean, it's a tougher schedule. There's going to be some growing pains, and it might be, to use Reiner's word, it might be a little cavalier to just assume that they're just going to pick up where they left off. But I don't think Sherrone is assuming that. I think he sees what's going on. He's been in that room every year the last 3 years. He knows who he handed the keys over to, and they could have. I mean, they show they're not shy to add pieces in the portal to this line like they did with Preeb. The year before, Drake Nugent, Ladarius Henderson, Miles Hinton, they added 3. The year prior to that, Olusegun Oluwatimi. So if they feel they need someone, they'll go grab them. They only added 1 guy. So I think they're pretty confident.
Yeah, but I don't know if that's a great idea for a new coach, especially with such a big question mark at that, again, very delicate position group, to make such a bold pronouncement. Why not give yourself a little bit of slack, and a ramp up here to see this unit, gel before you start, saying that the offensive line is going to be good from the get-go. I mean, we don't know that. And, they have a very tough schedule this year early on in September versus what they've had in the last couple of years. There's no ramp-up period anymore. They're going to be playing Texas week 2, and Fresno State is no slouch either in the season opener. So I think in some ways, I don't understand Sherrone's idea of sending these, very high expectations right off the bat, because, people are going to look at that comment and then they're going to evaluate the performance against that comment. And if it falls short of it, he's going to get some blowback for sure.
And to what he said in Indianapolis, right? He said there's no honeymoon period, right? And so,
right.
I think if you're a Michigan fan, that's what you want to hear. Is
right.
it not? Is it not? Sure, maybe he's setting himself up for failure or to take a lot of that blame. But I think the intent behind the message is good in that, look, doesn't matter that Jim's gone. Doesn't matter. JJ, Blight, name them. We have a standard in this building, and that's not moving. Now, are we going to meet it every year? I don't know if we are, but that's where we're shooting for, and anything less will be seen as unacceptable.
It's the opposite of the Scott Harris Detroit Tigers approach. Every spring training, he's like,
lose all the time, do nothing.
He's like, well, hey, we got a lot of young players, we're far away, and he's like setting the bar low, versus Sherrone is setting the bar at the moon. You know what I mean? It's just 2 different approaches. It each has drawbacks, right? If you're telling fans before the season every year, hey, we might suck again, that has its drawbacks. And also, if you're telling your fans, hey, we should be great again, and you suck, or you're not as good as you could be, it's just interesting to evaluate how different leaders portray the message.
Yeah, I don't mind a coach saying that in the macro sense, but again, if you're starting to get into the micro aspect of it, like
with a position group.
Yeah, position, we're going to be really, really good at this specific, and you have no idea if that's necessarily going to be the case. Like, again, there's a lot of factors that fall into an offensive line being able to perform well, including the level of competition they face. Again, it might not be a fair evaluation of Sherrone based on the schedule that he's, hit with early on. And I think he's setting up himself to be, criticized, and it might not even be necessarily fair, but again, he's put the standard at such a high level that, he's saying that they're going to be capable of achieving. Again, another example of that is saying that, despite them losing 18 players, that to the combine and the NFL and that went to the combine, he says we have all the talent we need. Well, they have talent. Legitimate first round level players at, 3 or 4 spots, if not, first rounders, definitely by early day 2 guy, at least, one of those guys probably would fall into that range. And so that's only 4 spots. There's 18 other spots. You've got to fill the gaps there. So, I mean, like, this is not, a by and large, talent spread across the board as it was like Michigan was last year. I mean, it's concentrated in specific areas.
Absolutely. And you've asked how we might see that bear out throughout this year, right? In the sense, I mean, with the complementary football and all of that. And you're right. And you don't have to just have high end talent, right? JJ McCarthy was the only first round pick. I think there were only 2 guys taken in the top 60, right, for Michigan, and yet they had 13 guys taken. Like 4 of them were in the 7th round, like late picks. But if you look at what those guys meant to the team last year, the Cornelius Johnsons, the Ladarius Hendersons, I mean, starting tackles, starting receivers, right? I mean, just extremely important.
Even a guy like Braden McGregor. I mean, it's like
UDFA.
Yeah, right. I mean, again, coming off the bench or starting or whatever, again, he was like
Josh Wallace.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, so you had those guys. I mean, and so saying we have all the talent we need, again, suggests that, if they fall short of X, and they don't win much, well,
and it's because of the coaching.
Whose fault is it? Yeah, it's the coaching.
Yeah. No, great.
And I
point.
think Perron is really setting himself up in a trap here. And I don't know if that was a very smart move on his part.
Yeah. In particular, because I just want to get into, just for a couple minutes, about the idea of these 2 units complementing one another. I mean, we haven't even discussed the quarterback component of this that today, which can, like, we're talking about the offensive line, right? Well, the quarterback can also make or break an offensive line. The running back can also make or break the offensive line. It works both ways. And there's no JJ, like, they still don't know who the quarterback's going to be, right? And then if you have an offense that is not sustaining drives, maybe, or to the same level at which they were, right? Not top 5 in the country in time of possession. And so they're not setting up a defense constantly in positive field position situations where they have to play the fewest snaps of any defense in the country, right? I think it was, one of the coaches gave us a great stat, or one of the players the other day. Only 4 times last year did an interior defensive lineman play more than 40 snaps. Kenneth Grant averaged 27 snaps a game. He might have to double that this year. Maybe not 54, 55, but 45 or 50 feels like a certainty, nearly, right? Right around there. And so, I mean, how do all these things play together? If the offense is not sustaining drives and the defense has to be out there more plays, I mean, this is a point you've made. How long can this bend, don't break? How long can that sort of last? And they're part and parcel of one another, and so you got to be very careful.
Right. I mean, again, like, they also didn't play most of the starters, both sides didn't play anywhere close to the full amount their first entire month of the season. It was basically, again, a ramp up period until the meat of the schedule. And I mean, you could argue that was the first 5 weeks, because I think, they played Minnesota.
Farther than that. I think JJ and Blake played 4 snaps in the 4th quarter in September and October. 4 total snaps.
Right.
Through 2 months in the 4th quarter.
Yeah. And that's indicative, again, of, they were just handling teams. Well, they're not going to be handling teams in the same way, presumably, against the competition that they're facing in September and October. I mean, again, their first road test is Washington, and Washington, again, is changing over, a big bunch of their roster too. But at the same token, again, it's out west. That's a really tough place to play. I have a feeling that game's going to be a 4-quarter game. And so, like, again, they didn't have to deal with it as much last year. And there was a large reason why, again, the defense was so strong, was the fact that they were well rested. Plus, they had a ton of depth. Again, you had guys cycling in and out on that defensive line, left and right, and they were able to kind of sustain their stamina over the course of the season, be able to make a 15-game run to the championship. And this team, may not have that luxury. This, especially, and that's why Kenneth Grant said the other day that he's already kind of prepared for the idea that he's going to be playing almost double the snaps this year.
Yeah, he and Mason told me as much when I sat down with them earlier this summer. They're both going to be playing. Kenneth was listed at 339. He was at 350 when I talked to him in the summer. He said he wanted to play more at like 330. Mason was listed, I think, at 318, and he wants to play at like 310 to 315. So they both are trying to play under their listed weight, to be sure. Now, I do want to get into a couple of the names on defense before we take a break, just as guys who are depth, right? Because maybe there's not the same depth pieces all around the team, but there are some, right? There are some guys that Sherrone singled out the other day that I think could really help, like a TJ Guy, for instance, in the edge room, right? It's not just that similar to last year. And on the interior, it's not, yes, Mason and KG will be asked to play a lot, but I think they got a couple of good defensive tackles behind them. Rayshon Benny, who broke his foot the Rose Bowl last year, had to sit out the national championship. I mean, he's said to be fully ramping up, and the expectation is he'll be ready to go for the season opener. And then also on that side of the ball, just, I guess, other position battles. I mean, you got Zeke Berry and Jaden McBurrows duking it out at nickel. At cornerback number 2, you got Amir Hall, the FCS transfer from Albany, who seems to be in a pretty tight battle with Jair Hill. Maybe I should call him Shug. That's what they all call him. So, and I mean, those are a lot. I think Michigan would be confident with any one of those guys in any of those places, right? And so when you have a couple guys in those spots, you do see places where it's like, all right, we do have some depth here.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't doubt that they, I mean, obviously have depth. I mean, at those positions, the question is like, how much, is it the same quality of depth that they had, the last year or so? And the idea is, though, that, again, this is probably a team that isn't, is somewhat of a work in progress in a lot of ways. Granted, they're coming off a national championship, but, Michigan also subscribes to the idea that each of these teams is different. That's why they number them differently. I mean, team 144, team 145. And, this idea that it's just going to be a continuation without any kind of hiccups is kind of, in some ways, I think Sherrone is kind of setting himself up for failure in that sense. And I think it's a dangerous game to play. I think, again, it should be understandable that they're going through a little bit of a transition period with this program, and that it's just not like, moving from, the head coach, Jim Harbaugh, to the offensive coordinator who was the stand-in coach for 4 games last year. And, it's just going to be a seamless transition. I mean, again, there's personnel changes, there's coaching changes, there's even some philosophical changes on defense that may be, taking place. So let's just kind of pump the brakes before we start, crowning, them as, the next, champion. And I think, again, it's reflected in the rankings, the fact that they're, 8th in one poll and 9th in another. I mean, again, it's the lowest ranking coming off a national championship, because I think any objective person would say, yeah, they've had a lot of things that they've got to kind of take care of and show, and prove, against a very challenging schedule.
That feels fair. That certainly feels fair. I don't know. I mean, I think Sherrone's in a little bit of a tough place, right? Because there's certainly so much to replace, but you risk striking like a defeatist tone if you're like, well, yeah, looking like, I mean, like he doesn't want to look like, I mean, he needs people feeling sorry for. I mean, he's not going to go into the season with built-in excuses, right? Like he's not going to be like, well, look at what we left. I mean, what message does that send to the guys in the locker room? So, I mean, he's not leaving himself a lot of room for error. I agree, but I still think if I'm a Michigan fan, it's the tone I want. I'd probably want Sherrone striking. Any final thoughts, Andrew? No, leave it there.
No, I think you guys hit the nail on the head, and it's kind of a nice place to leave it here before we get to our second part that you teased a little bit here.
Perfect. Let's do that. Take a break, grab some water. We'll see you in a second. Don't go anywhere. This is Hail Yes. Welcome back, everybody. All right. Part 2, which we teased a little bit in the open, is just taking a look at how coaches have done who are in similar positions to Sherrone Moore, stepping into a legendary coach's seat, right? So pre-show, we came up with 6 relative comps, some pretty close, some maybe not as much, but still you'll certainly see the parallel. And we want to sort of dissect maybe a little bit of sort of what happened there, why that went wrong. Could that happen here? How similar is it really? How similar is it not? So you'll understand as we go along. So I'm just going to say all the teams and schools and the coaches they were replacing up front. Then we'll break it down. So here are some of the comps. So we got Ohio State, Ryan Day taking over for Urban Meyer. You've got USC, where Lane Kiffin took over for Pete Carroll, also with scandal, leaving for the NFL. You got that sort of comp. That was back in 2010. Oklahoma, where Lincoln Riley took over for the legend Bob Stoops after he'd had a ton of success, but sort of felt like things had sort of run their course there. There's LSU, where Ed Orgeron took over for Les Miles. Even there, he was an interim, right? He served for a handful of games, a la Sherrone Moore last season. So that you can see. There's Oregon, where Mark Helfrich took over for Chip Kelly again when he jumped to the Eagles. It was then in 2015. And then last but not least, and this is what it can look like when things go really south, right? As Florida State. Sorry to my girlfriend, a Florida State alum. When Willie Taggart took over for Jimbo Fisher and DeAndre Francois tore his ACL, I believe, on the first snap or first series of her freshman year at FSU. I'm sure you all cared about that greatly, but things went really south there. So, okay, gentlemen, we understand the 6 comps. I'm going to turn it to Andrew, and who will start us off at Ohio State.
Okay, yeah. So I just want to lay some groundwork here. We kind of rank these based on what we think are probably the closest comparisons. And so we'll start with Ohio State because the number one reason this is the closest comparison is because Ryan Day had filled in as an interim for Urban Meyer the season prior. So he had already kind of had some of the sea legs, a bit like Sherrone Moore. And obviously we don't have to tell you guys how this has gone. You pretty much know for the most part, but just a little bit of a history review here. 2019 was Ryan Day's first year. He went 13-1 and lost to Clemson in the college football playoff. Not a very close game. Second year was the COVID year when they had to change the rules to make it so Ohio State could play in that Big Ten championship game. They ended up making it to the playoff and winning in the first round and then losing to Bama in the championship game. And then 2021 was where it kind of started to flip back to Michigan, where the Wolverines beat Ohio State at the Big House, and then Ohio State went on to win the Rose Bowl. So, yeah, I think
really tough stretch. You see why they're so upset in Columbus.
Yeah,
I mean,
objectively,
this
would be a huge success for Sherrone if he could boot out these 3 years, the next 3 years. Ryder, that's an undoubted home run, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, Ryan Day's performance as coach has been great outside of the Michigan game, and I mean, pretty much since he's been there. I mean. And, he's got them close to a national championship in 2020. I mean, granted, that was the COVID year, so results were all kind of screwy during that period. But, again, they ended up in the championship game in 2020. I mean, he's done a really good job there. He's kept the recruiting at a very high level. They just raided the transfer portal this offseason. And so, yeah, I mean, Ryan Day's been a really, really good successor to Urban Meyer since, he took over and, again, has shown an ability to coach at a championship level without winning it, the whole thing, and has the potential to do that. I would say the one knock against Ryan Day is that he didn't really keep the kind of culture of toughness that Urban Meyer kind of instilled in the program. And, that's been a big, I guess, net negative for them, especially in the series with Michigan. So that would be the one knock on Ryan Day. But overall, I mean, if Sherrone Moore can keep Michigan at the level that Ryan Day kept Ohio State, I think, Michigan fans would be pretty happy.
I mean, the sky is falling in Columbus because they haven't won a title in 10 years and because they've lost to Michigan 3 years in a row, right? And then the 2020 year where they didn't get to play. So really it's been 5 years since they've beaten Michigan, which is just, I mean, that's the reason they're beside themselves in Columbus. And it is a big It is a big but. But other than that, I mean, you both nailed it. I mean, it's Ohio State is one of the preeminent programs in the country. Michigan would, I think, take it and run if their next 3 years, the worst case scenario was an 11-2 year with a loss to Ohio State and a win in the Rose Bowl. I think Michigan would have no problem signing up for that.
Yeah, and the other thing is Ryan Day doesn't even have to beat Michigan anymore to get to the college football playoff and win it all, because again, it's the 12-team expansion. I mean, there's a much more clear path for this type of program, and you would think based on the talent and depth that they typically have, they're going to be competing for national championships, even with the result against Michigan notwithstanding. I mean, it just is like, it's set up for them to actually do really well in this format they going forward.
I would say they have to get one of them this year, though. They can't lose to Michigan and then not win it all. I think that might spell
maybe not win it all, but at least win a couple playoff games. I mean, I think it's going to be
go to the championship.
It's going to be so different now. I mean, if they
lose to Michigan and then end short of the national championship game in year 6 under Ryan Day, I think you got to go. I think you got to move on.
I don't know. I mean, I think we all have to recalibrate our college football brains here, because it's going to be such, like, imagine Ohio State, say they're like the 5-6, lose to Michigan. We can go through their schedule here in a second before we move on to USC quickly, just because I want to run through it. It's a little tougher, especially Big Ten wise, than I think people may realize. But so if Ohio State goes 10-2 and it loses to Michigan, and they're like the 6th seed and they're hosting a game. Okay, so they win the first game at home, a playoff game at the Horseshoe. And then say they win the second round, and now they're into the semifinal, and maybe they lose to Georgia or something. 2 playoff wins, including a neutral site game and a game at home. I mean, that just feels so much better than going to a consolation bowl game, even if you're finishing 10-2. You know what I mean? I think the calibrations and the expectations may start to be just a lot different than what we've seen in the past.
I agree. The reason it might be different for Day is he's on his last leg, right?
I wouldn't say he's on his last leg.
He's on his last leg.
Some of these other coaches were on their last leg, actually on their last leg. I don't think Ryan Day's on his last leg yet.
You were in Indy for Ryan Day.
No, it was not.
You weren't down there yet? Okay, next day?
I wasn't down there yet. But
some Big Ten insider.
I actually kind of lean more towards Tony. Based on what the team looks like this year versus what Michigan looks like, the fact that the game's in Columbus, if he doesn't win that game, it's probably game over for him. Because I mean,
in the first year under Sherrone, it would be 6 years at least without a win over Michigan. I mean,
so if they go 11-1 and make it to the championship game and lose, but their only loss is to Michigan, you think that he's on that much of a last leg? I mean, he's not like Brian Ferentz at Iowa. He was on his last leg. He had a score total. Like he's not on his last leg yet. I think if he puts together another good year and something crazy happens to Michigan, I mean, who are they going to hire that's better than maybe Mike Vrabel?
If he loses to Michigan, I can see where they would actually get rid of him just so that they don't have to make that decision and have to wrestle with it. Like they would actually probably dump him and get an interim coach
for the postseason.
For the postseason. Yep.
No way.
Yeah.
Dude, it's not. I don't know that I'd go that far. I'm pretty firm in my belief that it is a do or it is all or nothing. Like they got to get one of them. Like if they beat Michigan and win the Big Ten title, then they can fall short in this new look thing, right? Or there has to be something. It can't be the same second in the league, second in the big picture. Like, yeah, we're in the fray. They got to do something. They're beside themselves right now.
Yeah, I don't think they could just win the Big Ten. Like, if he loses to, he has to win the national championship. But
I think if they won the Big Ten and beat Michigan, you don't think he's safe?
I don't know. I don't think they would necessarily. Again, I think they could cut the cord right then and there because they don't want to set up a situation where, again, they're having to make that call at the end. Well, you got to the national championship, so we can't do this. But and such. So I think, I mean, and they probably have a legitimate, backup with Chip Kelly there too. I mean, that does, he's a.
I think they'd go after Vrabel, where they go after Chip Kelly.
Yeah, no,
Chip Kelly just flunked out at UCLA.
Yeah, but he would be an interim just to kind of. I mean, that's why I'm saying like they actually have
Luke Fickell part 2.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it could be. Yeah.
Real quick, let's just run through their schedule. So they open up with 3 Cupcakes, Akron, Western, and Marshall. Then they go to Michigan State. They host Iowa. Then they go to Oregon, Nebraska at home, and then they go to Penn State. And then they have Purdue, Northwestern, Indiana, and host Michigan. So at Penn State, at Oregon that's 2 games they very easily could be underdogs at. So we'll see.
Well, but don't forget the booster and NIL component of this. They spent a lot of money this offseason to beat Michigan essentially and kind of reestablish their supremacy in the Big Ten. So if they fall short of that, that's a lot of money on the line that went to waste. And, the boosters are the ones who make these decisions too, a lot of these programs. So
Will Howard, Caleb Downs, Quinshon Judkins, right? I mean, they were going all over the country.
Yeah. And then the money they kept to spend, the money they spent to keep their own guys.
Yep. JT, Denzel Burke.
Yep.
Abuka. Got Jeremiah Smith coming in. I mean, these guys are getting paid.
Plus the Connor Stallions element's gone for Michigan. So, I mean, like, again, they in their minds, they've got to beat Michigan this year. And so, and to me, that's make or break game for Ryan Day. As strange as this sounds, I really feel that way.
Well, I got body slammed by the Judgment Warrior. He came in tag teamed with Tony. But one thing I will say as a parting word is don't forget how quickly things can change. Michigan State beat Michigan under Mel Tucker in 2021. Harbaugh was dead and gone, basically. I mean, it was like, oh, that's it, final straw. And Harbaugh beats Ohio State and makes the playoff and rips off the best 3-year run in modern Michigan football history. So
that's really well done. That's actually really well done by Andrew.
Thank you.
That's actually really well done. But he had to do something he hadn't done, right? He was dead until they ripped it all off, right? Until they beat Ohio State, until they went to the CFP. That gave it that juice again.
I mean, Ryan Day's already beaten Michigan. I mean, he destroyed Michigan.
Right. No, I know, but that was year one. That's when beating Michigan was a given. Right. He needs to beat Michigan when Michigan is something to be beaten, right? Sure. Not like, oh, this is what we've done for 15 years. Like, of course.
Well, sure. And I mean, and that's why I think this year is, that game in particular is probably a make or break for his tenure at Ohio State.
Okay, let's switch gears to USC. Tony, tell us why it's similar to Sherrone.
Well, it was a coach who won a national title, who saw that scandal was coming and said, I got to go to the NFL. Let me get on out of here. So, I mean, Pete Carroll left for the Seahawks, and then Lane Kiffin came and took over. Also, first-time head coach, right? That was Lane's first job, I believe.
No. He was Oakland.
Oh, he'd already done Ole Miss before then?
It was Tennessee here.
Tennessee? Remember they were burning his jerseys?
I do.
And now. He was also the head coach of the Oakland Raiders.
Sorry, a young coach, a very young coach in his 30s, offensive side of the ball. Okay, sorry. The similarities
here, I think, primarily start with head coach.
It's
won
a head coach
championship,
leaving.
Left to go to the NFL as NCAA scandals loomed. Yes, there's of course similarities between Sherrone and Lane, but I think
the departing situation.
It's the departing that makes this similar. Yeah.
And the similarities with Carroll, he was a previous NFL head coach, so going to the NFL wasn't crazy. The other aspect of it was that the difference is that Carroll won his national championships years before. Harbaugh won his national championship and then bolted. So little difference there. And USC
Pete Carroll was 9-4 the year before he left.
Exactly. USC was trending down. I mean, they were trending down. I mean, it wasn't the dominant team in the early aughts. I mean, I saw them in peak USC in 2006. They came to Arkansas. I was covering the game. I was working at a local paper there, and they just beat the tail off them. I mean, it was like ridiculous. But the year before was even worse. They scored like 28 points in the first 8 minutes. It was 28-0. I mean,
when did Arkansas and USC schedule games against each other? That's a weird matchup.
Yeah, you said not had the greatest game. He was like, they score so fast it messes you up, and it was true. It was like that was the year that Reggie Bush did that crazy run against Fresno State, and they should have probably won the national championship.
Didn't MSU and Ohio State have a game like that a few years ago? I think it was Mel Tucker's first game when Kenneth Walker had to sit out. It was like 35-0.
Yeah, right.
40 seconds into the second quarter.
Yeah,
it's like playing a Pop Warner team.
Yeah, that was true, and that USC team, those mid USC team, they were loaded with NFL. I mean, it's like Miami in 2001 when they had all those guys. I mean, it was a juggernaut, but it had started to slip by then. So not exactly the same situation.
And USC, that's their record. So Lane Kiffin 8-5 year 1, 10-2 year 2, then sort of that make or break year 3, reverted back 7-6, and then fired in year 4.
I think the lesson here, and kind of a theme throughout, is you really don't know until year 3 or year 4. Year 4 seems to be where a lot of people get the plug pulled on them, but year 3 is, that's not exactly breaking news to college football fans, but year 3, we won't know. For Sherrone Moore could go 11-1 this year, and we might not know if he's got it rolling, if he's the future head coach of the Michigan Wolverines for years down the road.
Well, Kiffin was very, very bitter about that whole situation because he felt like he got the wrong end of the deal because of the scholarship restrictions that he had.
Fired on the tarmac.
That affect the roster, and then fired on the tarmac. I mean, and it's proven out. Again, he matured. He had to go into the Saban School of Rehabilitation and did that for a couple of years and really regained his footing in the college football space. So now he's got a team that's possibly a playoff contender. Yeah.
What are fired college coaches going to do now when they get fired? They can't go down to Alabama and be an analyst for a year.
He's probably asking the same question because he would have been a likely guy since he was a Saban guy.
And one thing we also have to keep in mind, I know we are trying to come up with as many similarities as we can. The transfer portal era does change things here, right? With the tenure and how it can look. Because a lot of times, you sort of like, as we'll see as we get into some of these other guys, you sort of see the fall off, right? Like you talk about how Ryan Day wasn't able to keep that same culture. And it's like, it's all right for a little while. And then you start sort of trending down. That's because, there wasn't the transfers, there wasn't the NIL, there wasn't all these things. People weren't moving all over the country in 2011, 2012, the way they are now, right? And that's a double-edged sword. You can Mel Tucker it, and you can flip a team around, and you can go to 11-2 right away, or
you can Mel Tucker it.
You can Mel Tucker it and go the other way.
And go 5-7.
Yes. Exactly. And so I just think there's going to be a lot more. Not necessarily in Michigan's case. I think there's going to be a lot more volatility in just like the trajectories of organizations, right? It's not going to be Iowa's gonna Iowa, but I don't know how many are going to just live in that 8-4, 9-3 kind of window, right? I think there's going to be sort of some ride in it.
I think the transfer portal does change, the trajectories of these tenures too, just be based on how quickly you can turn over a roster. And, I don't know how it will impact Michigan. They've been kind of, a little bit more judicious when they go in the transfer portal than other programs. So I don't know how it affects Sherrone Moore and what his future looks like in Michigan. But the portal mention is a smart one on your part, Tony.
Yeah, Andrew. Now, I think we probably got to speed these up a little bit, but we see where we're headed here. So Oklahoma, Andrew.
Oklahoma. So Bob Stoops, I'd say they were closer to where Michigan is now than where USC was at the end of the Carroll era there. Bob Stoops stepped down as 11-2 in 2016, which is his last year. Lincoln Riley was the heir apparent. He went 12-2, 12-2, and 12-2 in his first 3 years. So another one that Sherrone Moore would probably take, because it buys you time, it gets you on the right path, and obviously 12-2 in this era, that gets you into the college football playoff, and anything can happen at that point. And also, I think it's important to say, I think Lincoln Riley walked, so Ryan Day and Sherrone Moore could run. You know what I mean? Like, he opened that path of, hey, offensive coordinator, never been a head coach before, young guy. Sure, he can take over if he's a good offensive mind.
No, I think that's a great point. And also with as far as the 12-2, 12-2, 12-2, that level of consistency, Michigan, to say they would take that and run, I think is an understatement. I don't want, and I'm going to keep sort of beating this drum for a little while now, I don't want anyone to forget what Michigan is historically, right? These last 3 years are the outlier. These are the anomaly. This is not, oh, Michigan's back, right? Michigan was never 40-3 in a 3-year stretch with 3 outright Big Ten championships. They never did that one time, right? They had never won 13 games before 21, and then they won 15 games, right? Like there was just all these levels of benchmark they had never done. If Michigan reverts to 10-2, they are still one of the 10 best teams perennially in America. And then you want to see it at the table, right? You want to be in the Georgias, the Alabamas, the Ohio State. So a team that's always there, always around. And so, there were times where that had fallen off, right? Where Michigan was sort of 8-4 and 9-3. Like, the joke about Lloyd Carr was the reason, two lost Lloyd, right? Like you start the year with 2 L's, right? And so, that's what Michigan is. 10-2 is, and there's nothing wrong. And in this new era where 10-2 can get you a seat at the table 8 days a week, I just don't want that to be lost in the shuffle.
The Riley Stoops thing is interesting because Oklahoma, again, when Stoops first took over, was known as a defensive program, and Venables being the defensive coordinator was a big part of that. When Venables left to go to Clemson, they kind of started to slip defensively and became much more known as an offensive thing. Hence, Lincoln Riley takes over. Then they went to the extreme at the end of Lincoln Riley's tenure and
they hired Alex Grinch, somebody who does not know how to even say the word defense.
Exactly. And so they were already trending that way, when he took over, and then they got away from it. So what do? They hired Venables back as the defensive coach. And I think it's interesting, again, is Sherrone Moore going to lean further into whatever this thing, and it's going to be known as, again, a very, run heavy program, or is he going to, where the defense is kind of carrying the, load, or, is he going to try to, put his imprint on it and maybe swing things back to where there's more, it's more driven by the offense too. In some ways. So I don't know. It's interesting. Right now it seems like, Sherrone Moore wants to just continue everything that Jim Harbaugh has done.
And we've had mixed emotions about that. There's times that's good, times it's not. But Sherrone Moore seems to be building this team, or I think the idea of Sherrone Moore, it's kind of in the image that I have long said that I would build the team with. You guys have heard me harp on it long enough. The Lions did it the same. You build it through the offensive line, right? That's the foundation in my mind of a lot of the best teams. The trenches on both sides, right? Defensive line works the same. And Sherrone Moore, he said it, right? Andrew, you called it out earlier. He said, as long as I'm here, the offensive line is going to be solid. Now, we can't just assume they're going to win the Joe Moore Award, but I think that is kind of the MO of what he wants. And it feels a lot. And I love when coaches and their identity match that of the program. That's when you have success. I think we've talked about it on here a little bit. Certainly we have off air. That's why, in my estimation, one of many reasons Mel Tucker at MSU did not work. And one reason why it seems like Jonathan Smith, it just feels like he hasn't coached a game that feels like a smack dab fit. Just blue collar, 3-star, no headline, lunch pail, head down, go ahead. I've been around East Lansing I was around East Lansing a long time. I know that's how they work, and that's when they're at their best. I think Sherrone can grab that wheelhouse from Michigan. As long as you keep that defensive mindset and then just say, hey, smash mouth, smash, right? Smash. Michigan is smash. And I think that's good.
And I think that's another reminder. Sean Windsor mentioned this in his column. It's up on our website. There's the old saying, you want to be the coach who follows the legendary coach. You want to be the coach who follows the coach who followed the legendary coach. Yeah, you don't want to be the guy who follows right after. Michigan State, say they nailed it with Jonathan Smith, they still whiffed on Mel Tucker. To hit 2 in a row like that is really tough. And another reminder to Michigan fans that there's no guarantee. And even if it does work out like it did at LSU, how about that for a transition, where they had Ed Orgeron take over for Les Miles, who had that program roll into that 9-3, 8-4 Iowa range forever. He was fired after the first 4 games, and then Orgeron stepped in for the final 8 games, went 6-2. So Orgeron kind of warmed up a little bit more slowly. He was 9-4, 10-3, and 15-0. And then he was fired after year 5. Similarities here are you have an established coach, Les Miles, Jim Harbaugh, and Orgeron filling in as the interim the year before, landing the job because of what he did as an interim. And then obviously I'd be surprised if Michigan takes that path where Sherrone goes all the way up and then all the way down so that fast. But there is some similarities there.
Andrew, you remember when we were talking, I mean, like this, like 15 years ago now, at the end of the Lloyd Carr era, when everyone was holding the signs, we need a new car with Les Miles. You remember that?
Yes.
Yeah, that's all I think about. Whenever I hear the name Les Miles, I mean, I was just like, I mean, you got to hire that. I mean, it's just too catchy. Like that alone would work. But yeah, I mean, this seems like the most unique. So of all these 6, this is the one that really doesn't fit any of the other patterns. Like there's some flame outs, there's some consistency. I mean, I think this is just the Joe Burrow effect, right? The Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, maybe the best offense in the history of college football, just popped off, went up, got an Natty, and then, I mean, like 15 months later, or
Coach O can coach football, though. I mean, he can coach football. I mean, he did the same thing at USC. Ryan and I were talking about that. He had a good interim run at USC. I mean, he can coach. I think he lost the wheel for, a bunch of reasons that I think we still don't really know exactly what happened. You saw the pictures of him at the bar and hanging out, and there was reports about him having women to the practice and stuff like that. But I think he lost focus more than anything.
The coordinators being gone also hurt. I mean, Joe Brady. And
well, yeah, but he could have hired another offensive coordinator, even at the disastrous end.
He tried. He hired
their offense was still really good in his last year. I can look it up, but they were still putting up points. But I think it was more so some of the stuff going on inside the program of why he got fired after. I mean, you guys remember in 2019, like when he won that championship game. I mean, it felt like he would never buy a drink in Louisiana again, and he'd have a job for the rest of his life. And all of a sudden, boom, he's fired.
I mean, they were all about Edo at that time. I mean, you need a Hummer. Oh, I mean, like, have you seen that commercial where he's like selling a Hummer?
You're not a college football fan if you haven't seen that commercial.
Okay, thank you. Oh, very good. Yeah, no, I'm done with my comments on that one, unless Reiner has anything else.
Oh, I think it's one of it was a very unique situation, but I mean, again, LSU is one of those places where the last 3 coaches have won national championships: Nick Saban, Les Miles, Ed Orgeron. And so it's a place that you can win. I've always said it's absurd that they went as long as they did without winning a national championship, because they are the only Power 5 university in that state that also is an extremely fertile recruiting area. And so, like, it should be, it should be winning that championships left and right in some ways because of the way that they're set up. I mean, it is a gold mine down there as far as talent is concerned.
All right, moving on. We got 2 left, so we'll be quick. Mark Helfrich filling in for Chip Kelly. Similarities: Chip Kelly leaves for the NFL, had the program rolling. He was 12-1 in his last year when Helfrich took over. So yeah, I mean, I think and as a coordinator taking over for the head coaching role. There's some similarities there, and then it kind of went off the rails towards the end of the run. They went 11-2 in year 1, 13-2 in year 2, 9-4 in year 3, and then he got fired after year 4. So that went downhill pretty quick, and would probably be a situation that Michigan fans would be hoping to avoid.
Yeah, probably. I mean, the way it fizzled out, but I mean, if you remember some of those early Mark Helfrich Oregon teams, I mean, 13, 14, 15, they were the ones. I mean, that was back. Again, the first teams I covered when I was a student at MSU, they played these Oregon teams, right? They were stripe out in Autzen and at Spartan Stadium. I mean, to start the year, those games were slugfests, if you recall. And I mean, Oregon had a top 5 team in the country. I think that year too, I think 24. Did they make the CFP, the inaugural CFP, or did they finish?
They were in the championship game against Ohio State.
And that was their second loss, right? So I mean, I remember that team was, that 2014 team, Michigan State only lost twice. It was to Oregon and Ohio State. And because that was the year after MSU had come off the Rose Bowl and they thought they were maybe in the national championship conversation. And the 2 teams they lost to were the teams that played for the title. Wasn't that right? Isn't that how that worked? Now I just put it together. Okay. See, we can get back through the Rolodex here. But the point is, I don't know. I mean, yes, Michigan fans want to avoid that fall off, but I mean, if you're keeping that championship window open these next couple years, then I just feel that the end would that Sherrone wouldn't go down that same path if these next couple years you're able to hit.
See, I disagree. I think that maybe like you said, maybe they hired Sherrone to open up these championship windows, kind of like who were the Miami guys, Reiner? So one of the coaches left, and then was it?
It was Butch Davis, and then Larry Coker took over.
Larry Coker, yeah. Coker came in and kind of they hired him essentially because, hey, we have this loaded team, keep us rolling.
Yep.
But then Coker wasn't the long-term solution.
Yep.
I think if you're a Michigan fan, the hope, like you said, if you make it to the championship game 2 years from now, there won't be many people complaining about the Sherrone Moore era. But the hope would be that this is your guy for 10 years,
Yeah,
definitely.
Of course. I think with, the Helfrich thing, it just kind of slowly unraveled. The defense, I think, got progressively worse, and they lost a little bit of their kind of punch offensively, especially towards the end. Again, Chip Kelly's offense just started to be kind of solved at that point too. I think people were starting to be able to defend it much more easily, which is why he hasn't had the same success that he had during his tenure at Oregon. None
of them fell apart as fast as Florida State, though, which I think is the last comp, and maybe a stretch. Andrew, do you think it's a stretch? I don't know.
Maybe a hair.
It's actually a good way because Willie Taggart was the guy who replaced Mark Helfrich, and he was also the guy who took over for Jimbo Fisher.
Yes, right down the line. Taggart. Where this comparison maybe falls a little short is that Jimbo Fisher, by the end of his run at Florida State, was trending very much down, and Michigan is very much trending up when Harbaugh left. So this one maybe falls a little closer to the USC comparison and a little less like the Ohio State, but they went 5-7 year one and 4-5 in the second year, and that he was fired before the end of the season. Only went 9-12 his entire time there, and took Florida State a while to get back on track to where they were last year before they were kind of robbed of their spot in the 14 playoff, but they were able to get it back. So another thing to keep in mind for Michigan fans is even if it does go completely off the rails, being a program like Florida State or like Michigan or like Ohio State, you always have the brand and the resources to, if you get the right guy, you can get it back on track, even if it does go off track like this one.
Yeah, Michigan knows that, but they don't want to go from 2007 in Lloyd Carr to 15 in Harbaugh again and have to go through 8 lean years of Rich Rod and Brady Hoke. So, and that is, there's no doubt that is, that might be Michigan's, ace in the hole, trick up its sleeve, its calling card, what have you. It's that sort of it felt like what happened under Rich Rod and Brady Hoke was impossible, right? Like it's impossible to struggle this much at a school and a program with the resources and the history and the tradition where it feels like 8 wins are built in. Right? Like you're starting the year at 7-5. 8-4 means you have a pulse. 9-3, it's like, all right, we got a decent team. And then beyond that, it's like, what are we really doing here? How good are we? And so, yes, Michigan is one of those. There are teams and programs where if you fall off, like Arkansas, I would say. Arkansas does have some pedigree, and I think they might be okay this year, right? But it's just like once you fall off, you may never come back. Right? You just don't know. You just don't know.
Sure.
But Michigan, they're not going anywhere.
Well, it's the same with, again, Michigan State. You don't know if they're going to get back to, the D'Antoni era ever again. Maybe. But it's not guaranteed. Michigan, you got to have a feeling that, the right guy would get them kind of back to that, top level where they're kind of mentioned again with the Blue Bloods. Going, with the idea that, again, why Rich Rod, failed. Part of it was like he wanted to do a complete shift in philosophy and tone with the program, and there were obviously people who were resistant to that idea within the Michigan ranks. So that was part of the reason why he failed. That's the benefit of having Sherrone. He's kind of a continuation of the kind of football, or he promises a continuation of the kind of football that Michigan is accustomed to playing and wants to play. So from a cultural fit, he's would be the right guy in that sense. So they're not going to, again, a Kalen DeBoer, maybe that would have been a totally different type of style. Now I think, again, Kalen DeBoer would have probably been welcomed more at this point than say Rich Rod was in 2008.
But also in theory, this new Sherrone is supposed to have less baggage and less distraction than his predecessor, right? So you're supposed to be able to keep that continuity. You're supposed to keep that continuity with less of the downside of it, right? Is kind of the idea.
Well, the problem is that he's been ensnared in 2 NCAA investigations himself, and so there's the continuation. That's the problem. And I mentioned this in the column I wrote today, was that you can't really move on to the black side of the NCAA because he was right involved in it too. I mean, he was part of the program, and obviously because of that string of text messages, regardless of what the content was, and it just he's somewhat connected to this whole unpleasant situation, and so that's the risk involved of having Sherrone Moore be the coach versus a completely new person.
And on the small scale, he's already experienced what it's like being left to hang out to dry, right? I mean, just yesterday when Sherrone was the one who had to sort of answer the questions that, Jim Harbaugh is actually not coming back as an honorary captain, right? And so they're not. He's gonna take some bullets, right? He's gonna take some heat. There's no protection from the scrutiny.
Yeah, it takes over a program. And I mean, again, his most visible moment to date is the crying episode after the Penn State game. And a lot of people mocked that, too, and kind of showed, looked at it as an example of again, Michigan, trying to paint themselves as victims in this situation with the sign stealing scandal. And again, it's just all that stigma and unpleasant, characterization that's hovering over the program. He absorbs all that. I mean, and so he moves on, and Michigan can't have a clean break from that situation. It's going to trail them through the whole season. And so that's the risk involved of having, Sherrone as the head coach. And that's kind of like what I, kind of hinted at in the column, there too. I mean, it's that, it's going to trail Michigan. It's going to continue to trail Michigan this year.
Yeah. And Sherrone is going to continue to, I think Sherrone, we are starting to learn Sherrone's personality, right? It seems like it took a little while, but I think it's just, so what? He's just going to say, okay, you're going to say what you're going to say. All right, I'm going to do it. Right, wrong, or indifferent. That's the way he's approaching it. Mm-hmm. So, and as we say, time will tell, right? There's no, I mean, if we all knew, we'd be out of the job, or only one of us would have a job, because then we'd only need one of us to write and say, well, exactly what's going to happen. So that's why we get to prognosticate. All right, that will do it for one of our lengthier shows, unless Andrew had a final thought.
I'm just fired up. That was what podcasting about college football is all about. Long-term context, talking about 6 different generations or eras of football and going in a general direction, but just kind of shooting the crap,
Yeah,
that was awesome.
It was. That really got my college football juices flowing, for sure.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Totally.
And I think next week we could possibly do some sort of predictions episode, right? Or because we don't want to do that the week of the game. We're going to be breaking down the X's and O's, a little bit into Fresno State, a little bit of those sorts of things. But I think next week would be a good opportunity to sort of play It's Our Flag, some bold predictions, perhaps some breakouts, some letdowns, what have you. We'll workshop it. But if you're with us this far, then you have that to look forward to quite possibly next week. And with that, I just got to say thank you to all the people who make this possible, like our editor-in-chief, Nicole Avery Nichols, and our audio engineer, Robin Chan. So for Andrew, for Reiner, I'm Tony. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time. This is Hail Yes.